So today I'm going to be talking about the Vasta vision. We're doing a series of talks at the moment on the different areas of living the awakened heart, which is our, if you like, our practice over a lifetime, really, based on the DHB and the THB, but mainly based on the DHB, which in itself is complete in itself in a way, but then it can be augmented by other teachings. And the first area we talked about was love and compassion. And I put that first because if you forget everything else and you just have love and compassion, then you can die like that. You'll be fine. You know, you'll be protected by that. You'll find your way to the Dharma through that. You'll connect with other beings through that. You'll not make bad karma because you won't be tempted to do the, unskillful actions because your heart's so full of love. So, and ultimately, what do you realize? You realize awakening, which is a heart of love, which is the awakened heart. So, and it's also something that people intuitively sense is the right thing. People with no religious background at all or inclinations at all understand love and compassion. So I put that first. If you don't hear or get anything else, just get love and compassion. And then the next area is about insight into emptiness, into the ultimate reality of things. And the reason I put that second was because as Westerners, if we've got love and compassion in our own culture, why are we looking for something else? And we're looking for something that has deep wisdom in it, deep understanding of the nature of reality. And we do tend to be drawn to the teachings on emptiness and wisdom and emptiness because we are seeking truth. I mean, obviously not everyone, but I think that's a tendency in our culture. We value love and compassion, and we value truth, reality, and facing up to reality. So what is the truth? And it's because Buddhism specializes in teaching us how to approach that and to go deeper into that I think we convert. We seek it out. And then the next area we've been talking about is practices that we can adopt in our life, that we can live our life by. You could call that mindfulness, you could call it meditation, you could call it morality, like the paramitas, generosity and discipline and patience and effort and samadhi, prajna, but things that we can actually do in our life and apply in our lives. And the reason I put those three practices or areas first is because as Westerners, without adopting any new beliefs or ideas, we can give ourselves to those three areas. And a lot of Westerners call themselves Buddhists on the basis of these three areas. They find this is sufficient motivation for them to regard themselves as Buddhists. And you might think, well, surely it is sufficient. Well, that's a question of debate, I suppose. But from the point of view of the tradition, your Buddhists from the Buddhist countries and tradition and who descending from the Buddha's teachings, they would be very surprised that a person would want to call themselves a Buddhist without believing in samsara, rebirth, future lives, endless cycle of rebirth and liberation from it. Buddhism is about liberation from the endless cycle of rebirth. So they would be surprised that people would want to say they were Buddhist if they didn't believe in that. But a lot of people do. So this fourth area, to my mind, defines us as Buddhist, because you can practice the other three areas effectively and usefully without it actually having anything to do with samsara and nirvana, which I'm calling the vast division. Like, what is samsara? You could think, well, it's suffering, and practicing mindfulness and meditation and mindfulness in our daily life, well, that helps relieve suffering. So yes, that's true, but it doesn't cut through all of suffering. It deals with some of it as we go along, but it doesn't deal with the fundamental underlying cause of suffering. So if you like, your Western person who doesn't want to accept any kind of belief system will say, well, that's good enough for me, and who can argue? If that's what they say, then that's good enough for them. But that's the special thing that the Buddha taught, was the cause of all suffering and the cessation of all suffering, and the path to realizing the ending of all suffering through realizing the cause. What's the cause of the suffering? So that is not just a little extension of our usual common sense Western way of thinking. It's not a materialist's view of the universe at all. It's a major shift from our ordinary way of thinking into... It's a real revolution. It's a real turning around of our whole view of everything. So that's why I call it the vast division. And this is the vision you would get if you were to read the Sutras and read the stories of the great Buddhist saints of the past. You read their stories of liberation, their stories of how they went from being ordinary beings to being enlightened beings, and then how they reappear in the world in order to benefit beings. It's the exciting bit, really. It's sort of like, wow, what a vision of what a possibility. And it's based on this vaster vision of what we are as beings, what we are as people. Something that even the Westerners think they're very, scientific and rational. What science has made no progress in, really, is defining what is a person and what is the mind and awareness and what it all is, really. So it's not that we're anti-science, because everything science has discovered is fine, but it hasn't discovered anything about this. So this is our speciality, if you like, that we're talking about this. And you might say, well, such a vision of past and future lives and being able to work forever to emanate out and benefit beings, it's all belief. How do we know it's true? Well, to think it isn't true is also belief. How do we know it isn't true? What are you going to do about that? So do we have reason to think it could be true? I think there's loads of reasons for thinking it could be true. And it becomes more and more evident, I think, as one deconstructs the materialistic view that we've inherited and our instinctive, ego-clinging kind of view that I think the whole of our society is almost like, I shouldn't say the whole of it, but it's it's so prevalent and so almost worshipped. But that's only half our society. The other half of our society, and even each person in the society, is about love and compassion, isn't it? You know, we're not all just one mass of materialistic, egocentric, grasping people. We're all a mixture, and the society as a whole is a mixture. So I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves. Our values are basically of love, passion, justice, truth. These are our values. We may not, live up to them all the time, but these are our values. So we're not a bad society. Should I say yet? Let's hope never. Yeah. I've digressed from what I was saying. What was I saying? I was going to talk about rebirth, wasn't I? But yeah, the cessation of all suffering, that's right. And the vision behind that, and that there is a cause for all suffering, and therefore the possibility of a cessation of that cause, and therefore a cessation of suffering altogether, which of course is, what are you talking about? There's always going to be people suffering. There's always going to be sickness and death and all the other things. So what can you talk about? Cessation of all suffering. That's right. I was talking about mind, wasn't I? How in the West there isn't any real theory of mind, and that actually Buddhism is all about mind. Like where it's all emanating from. Where is all this manifest world emanating from? And the Buddhist view is it emanates from the mind. We create it in the mind. It manifests in the mind. And that mind that we're using here is used in many different senses, but in this sense, it's the basis of everything, which we're not really ready for that, are we? That the whole universe is emanating from mind. That's a very quirky way of thinking that I'm sure there's physicists somewhere who are contemplating that might be true, but generally speaking, it's like, no, that can't be true. There must be the universe out there that's material, and we don't know what the mind is, but presumably it's also something that's related to this material world. And they haven't made any progress with that yet, but they think they will. They're solving other things, so why shouldn't they solve this one? And we're sitting here watching them thinking, when are they going to turn around and realise what they're talking about discovering is their own nature? They're not going to find it outside. But I think it'll take a while before the penny drops. In the meantime, as Buddhists, we're not making the assumption that there's a world out there that's different from the mind. We're starting from the assumption that all we really know is, you could say the mind, or you could say experience. I notice that Rigzin Shikpa prefers to say all we know is experience, which is the same as saying all we know is the mind. And then we interpret our experience as meaning there is a world outside of our experience. But we don't experience anything outside our experience, just by definition, do we? So all we have is our experience. But when we think that or say that, there's a tendency to think, oh yes, my experience, like somewhere within my body or maybe a little bit wider. But my experience is kind of just what's going on behind the curtain in my little world. We're not really ready for experience meaning the whole of everything. Totality. All we have is totality, actually. That's all there is. I mean, anything else is extracted out of it, isn't it? My little bit. A little bit of what? The totality. So how is your little bit divided off from the rest of totality? Well, it must be, mustn't it? Through my thinking, basically. So all that kind of, those assumptions that keep our thinking small, they do get undermined by just looking at emptiness, like in that second area that we're looking at. We sit in the meditation, we see our experience, we let go of it, we let get a sense of space. Something's loosening up, and we maybe look to see, inside, outside, self, others, time, space. Oh, it's all breaking up, like, oh, what is this really? And that opens out into vaster vision. But one of the things that holds us back when we're exploring is that we have an assumed small vision, or even a nihilistic way of thinking. So it really helps, as I was saying yesterday in my talk from the Buddha Within, it really helps to have a conceptual framework that sets us up to realize something vast. Like if you think you're small and behind the curtain and you'll only examine that, that's all you'll ever realize, unless something breaks in. But even if something breaks in, there's a tendency to think it's another experience of mine, still small. Whereas if you're already prepared for, actually, there's something about the nature of my being that goes beyond this body, this life. If you're already thinking that, then as you break through your assumptions, your mind is already primed, ready to go into a vaster vision. And the vaster vision is you receive from listening to the Buddha's teachings. So basically this whole area is about listening to the Buddha's teachings about the nature of reality, about the nature of the universe, and especially about the nature of birth and death. I suppose I'd say especially the nature of samsara. And samsara implies that we're trapped, we're stuck in a cycle of creating negative karmic results from our actions out of ignorance and the mental poisons, negativity, and we're perpetuating a cycle of birth and death endlessly that is tending towards getting increasingly worse, more stuck. So the tendency is to go down into samsara at an increasingly terrible pace. Like once you get on a downward spiral, it's very difficult to pull yourself out of it again. On the other hand, if you do manage to get on an upward spiral, it does start to have a momentum and you can be helped, and there is some hope that you will actually find the path to liberation and step out of that. Here we go. Step out of that whole cycle of birth and death, which is compared with waking up from a dream. So it's as if we're asleep and we just keep repeating the same patterns. We believe the dreams are all real. We get more and more upset and excited by them, and we just get into a worse and worse state of mind. And in this case, it's not just mind, but we're actually taking rebirth in the kind of worlds that we're creating with the mind. And this is may sound distressing, and from the point of view of where the Buddha is looking from, it is far more distressing than we allow for, actually. We think this world at this time is already terrible. I mean, it's nothing. It's really nothing. Even the worst suffering that's going on the earth, and that's terrible, it can be even worse. It can be worse, and it can be worse for a very, very long time. You can be trapped in worse states for a very, very long time. And this is the cosmic view, if you like, of that the Buddha was working within, and what Buddhists, especially, certainly my Buddhist teachers are working within, that here we are at a point where we have a lot of choice. We can choose, we hear the Dharma, we hear the teaching, we can choose to follow those teachings, and this is one of those very rare opportunities to step out of samsara, onto the path to awakening, eventually to arrive at the total awakening, where you realize actually this suffering is created by mind, and it's not necessary and isn't really happening in a sense. It's like somebody drowning in a dream. You could say, well, it's very cruel to tell them they're not drowning in a dream. They're not drowning. As far as they're concerned, they are, but from where you're looking, they're not. So from where you're looking, you can see, well, I could try to, emanate a boat into their dream, and they'd get in the boat and they'd feel happy, but it would be even better if I could just wake them up. You can see there's a sort of dilemma there. If I can't wake them up, maybe if I could project boats into their dream and then send them a lifeline, and then they could escape, and then they get in the boat, then they'd be happy, but only for a while. And then they start dreaming something else that was awful, and I'd have to try and sort them out again, which I'd much rather wake them up. This is the Buddha's compassion is just all-pervading. It pervades all beings. It would wake them up if we would only cooperate. The power to wake up is there, it's in us already, and the Buddhas are on our side, and the Buddhas are powerful. But we are just a bit too clever at holding on to our delusions and avoiding being woken up, shutting down, closing down. The more we suffer, the more we tend to close down, don't we? Sort of like, oh no, that's more and more difficult to help us. That's why samsara is so vicious, because the worse you get, the more difficult it is to be helped, which doesn't seem fair, does it? The worse you get, it should be, you need more help, but you're getting less. So, and that does play out in our lives, doesn't it? I mean, we see that process. But this cosmic view that actually our human realm is just a little vignette, just a little scenario within a vast, unbelievably vast universe of beings who are suffering in endless ways. On the one side, that's just terrible, because how can I help all those beings? On the other hand, the awakened heart is their essence and reachable at any time, any place. So for a Buddha, you just call on a Buddha, and a Buddha's there, because there's nowhere else to be. But from our point of view, you could go for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime without ever realizing you were meeting Buddhas. It would seem to you that you were in total darkness, totally lost. And the Buddhas are we just don't see it, we just don't realize it. So when we talk about love and compassion, we're really going to, with our love and compassion is like a very, just sort of like the glimmer of what the Buddha's love and compassion is, because our love and compassion, we can maybe extend it out as far as we can extend our mind, but then our mind gets tired. I can't think anymore, I can't have any more. Sort of like, oh, that's too many. Oh no, not even more suffering. Oh no, because somehow we're misunderstanding what it is. It's what suffering really is. Whereas for a Buddha, that love and compassion is just always there for beings at any point. It's radiating love and compassion the whole time. So again, that's a big leap for a materialistic person to think that there's such a thing as enlightenment, and that actually it's here and now, all pervading and accessible. I could just I could just bow to it, I could just open to it, I could just create a shrine and make offerings and relate to it and connect to it. That seems, well, that's just belief, isn't it? But yes, and it's our belief, our wrong beliefs, that make it so difficult for Buddhas to help us. Yes, we're full of wrong beliefs. So maybe we could suspend disbelief and think, well, maybe, since I don't know if they're there or not, maybe if I were to act as if they were, I could see what happened. Because if they are there, there will be a difference. And I think one does find there is a difference. But you have to kind of give it a go. Because if you wait, I'm not going to talk to you until I can hear you. I'm not going to listen until I hear you. But because you're closing your ears, so you're not going to hear or see or whatever it is. So in a way, you have to kind of open to the possibility. Rather than, you don't have to, oh, I believe there are Buddhas. Oh, I could open up to the possibility that there are Buddhas. See what happens. So this is what this whole area is about, the vasta vision. It has so many aspects to it. I was wondering, how should I begin the talk? And one of my ideas was to start with the verse from the Samantabhadacharya Pranidhana, the extent of the Pranidhana. Just as space extends without limit, beings, karma and kleshas extend without limit. Therefore may this my Pranidhana extend without limit for as long as beings, karma and kleshas last. That's vast vision, isn't it? It's easy to say it because even if you've only got the idea of humanity as a whole at this time and place, that seems vast enough, doesn't it? But just as space is without limit. And I remember receiving this teaching from the old Lama Tubden in Birmingham, and I was trying to translate it. And he was saying, wherever there's space, there's beings. And I thought, no, that's not right. I can't translate it like that. That's not right. There's space, and in the space, here and there are beings. But he was saying, no, wherever there's space, there's beings. It's taken me decades, really, for the penny to drop. Quite what he's saying there. But it's something akin to what Rigzin Shikpa says when he says, there is only beings. There's only beings. Which isn't far off from saying there's only experience. Or there's only mind. And then what the mind creates. Of course, coming from a very materialistic, scientific culture, we immediately go into, then what is it all then, really? What is all that? All these subatomic particles and all this scientific knowledge that we've gathered about the world out there. That can't be mind. So then, of course, that depends on what we mean by mind, doesn't it? And, of course, Western thinking doesn't know what it means by mind. So it's a kind of a nice, fresh, new question. Like, what is it that knows? What's knowing, even? What is it? What is knowing? Is there such a thing as is there really genuinely a possibility that things could exist outside the knowing quality of the universe? If knowing is a quality of the universe, is it possible for there to be things that are outside of that? Well, to answer that, you'd have to know what that knowing quality was, wouldn't you? So I guess we'll keep looking at what the knowing quality is, and then we might eventually realise that actually there isn't anything that isn't of the same nature as that knowing quality. which would be a very different kind of universe to the one that, the materialistic view of the universe that we're trying to fudge together at the moment. So yeah, there's lots to be discovered. So the Buddha didn't really talk about the materialistic universe and what that was. If he could see it, and one assumes he could, he realized that wasn't going to help solve the problem of suffering. And it would be very complicated to explain to us. So he kept repeating again and again, I'm not teaching you everything I know. I'm just teaching you suffering, the cause of suffering, and the way to go beyond suffering. Suffering and its cessation, that's all I'm teaching you. I'm not teaching you the nature of the universe. So sometimes when people say, oh, Buddhism, it's like science, isn't it wonderful? I thought, well, no, I don't think the Buddha would agree. He's not trying to teach about the nature of the universe. He's trying to teach the nature of suffering, because that's what matters. If we're not suffering, then we've got all the time in the world to discover the nature of the universe. What we need to know is what our own nature and the nature of suffering and how to go beyond suffering. Why else do we want to know the nature of the universe? Because we want to relieve suffering. Well, if you want to relieve suffering, don't bother looking at the nature of the universe. Look at the nature of your experience and what's causing suffering. And then you can find the route out of suffering. And I think if we end up enlightened, we will actually then know the nature of everything. The great goal of Western science, to know the nature of everything. But it's very important, I think, for us to realize that the Buddha was teaching the nature of suffering, and that there's a lot that we need to learn about that. And that even if we don't really realize the nature of suffering, or we don't really realize fully the nature of samsara, at least we have a framework of there is such a thing as samsara that I'm stuck in. There is such a thing as a path out of that, and that path involves understanding the nature of suffering, experience. And that starts with the Eightfold Path. And the first step on the Eightfold Path is right view. And right view is the right view of the nature of our experience. When we realize the true nature of our experience, which would be realizing how we get caught up in suffering, we can then take the steps that lead out of suffering. So then we can have the right intention, the right aim. As I was saying yesterday, we can aim right thinking. We can follow that through with our actions and our speech, what we say, what we say we'll do will follow exactly from what we are, our vision of where we're going and what's true. And then if all our energy goes into that, we end up with what you might call the right focus or samadhi. And if that samadhi, that focus, stability of mind is based on right view, that's the end of suffering. That's the end of the confusion that is leading to suffering. And the suffering, sometimes you hear, well, the suffering arises from desire and attachment. But the desire and attachment is arising from the wrong view, from the confusion, that you're trying to grasp onto what isn't graspable. So you're suffering from trying to have what can't be had, or trying to fight off what isn't really there. So right view is the remedy for the suffering, and it's when you haven't got the right view and you haven't got stability in that you do grasp, you are confused, you do grasp, And again, although you've died from one life, one body, you grasp onto another. That's why suicide is not a solution. When people are feeling suicidal, from a materialistic point of view, it's not entirely clear why it's not a good idea. But from this point of view, it's not going to solve anything, because the suffering is caused by grasping out of a state of confusion. So, right view, at least to be connected to the right view, or connected to a mandala that's drawing you towards the right view, is your best option, even if it's still miserable at the time. At least you're on a trajectory towards the ending of suffering. And that connection actually becomes more important than anything else, because we can't always maintain right view, can we? I mean, our minds aren't stable enough. But we can maintain connections. That's why we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, in the whole mandala of awakening. Taking refuge means that we, however bad it gets, we still honour that connection. And we don't do anything that would damage that connection. So you could say, well, that's quite conceptual, isn't it? It's like a belief. Yes, it is. And so is anything else you might do at that stage. Because we're always believing something, aren't we? So we've got to be careful what we choose to believe. Yes, reality is beyond all concepts. If you can rest beyond all concepts, well, good for you. Then you don't need beliefs, do you? But if you can't rest beyond all concepts, if your mind isn't stable, you are using concepts anyway. You are going by beliefs and assumptions anyway. So look at them, see what they are, and see whether they're any good. Is that a useful assumption? Is that a useful way of thinking or believing? And make sure that you adopt useful, reasonable ways of thinking and believing. And sometimes, you can play tricks with yourself with thinking, can't you? Like you pretend you think something because it's very positive, and it puts you in a positive state of mind, and therefore it's sort of somehow self-fulfilling. So, from the Buddhist point of view, what's true and what isn't true is not so much a matter of belief as effect. If it has a positive, useful, truthful, reasonable effect, then it's a good thing to think. That's as good as true. And the same is when they tell stories about, stories of enlightened beings. When you read the life of an enlightened being, you think, well, is it actually true? The important thing is, if I were to take that as an example of how to live my life, would it lead to happiness and liberation? If it would, why not believe it? Somebody could say, yeah, but it wasn't really like that. Well, it's not so interesting, really. If it were true, it would be true for me if I believed it was true. So even believing something is true is a matter of belief, isn't it? What you're choosing to take an interest in and to believe in. It's all a matter of thinking, isn't it? So there's a lot to be said for this vaster vision, opening your heart, your mind, allowing things to be possible, could be true, and then working out what effect it would have on you if it were true, if you were to believe it. If I were to believe that my nature was really primordially the Buddha nature, the Buddha jnana, that's just got a bit obscured by my wrong ways of thinking, if I were to believe that, what would I do? I wouldn't take my wrong ways of thinking as so seriously, and I would be looking all the time for what in my being doesn't change. And if I find that it's actually spaciousness and sensitivity and clarity, and I remember that could actually be my Buddha nature, why not believe it? Why not act as if it were true and see what happens? It is a bit conceptual to start with, but that's how we always start out learning anything, isn't it? It's a bit conceptual at first, and then we give it a try and gradually realise, oh, that's how it works, Oh, that way of thinking wasn't quite right because it's more like this, and then you find your way through. So when it comes to the Sangha, and how if you're a member of the Sangha and you've done your DHB, and then possibly you go on then to do THB.
Can you say what it is, Lama?
What?
DHB.
Oh yeah. So the course that we introduce everybody to when they walk in the door, if you like, is called Discovering the Heart of Buddhism. That's DHB. And if you really could understand the principles that are taught in DHB that you discover through your own experience, if you really understood those really deeply, you would actually open out into this vaster vision. In the DHB, we refer to it, we just hint at it with the expression endless compassionate vision. Our nature is openness, clarity, sensitivity. And when we really realize that, it becomes limitless. Like space extends without limit. There's no limit to it. Endless. And it's naturally sensitive, compassionate, actively working for the benefit of others. Like I'm saying, the Buddha's compassion is all-pervading. It's accessible to all beings at all times. It's compassionate, and it's vision in the sense that it's the view, it's the right view that the right view is really the same as awakening and being awake. You've woken out of the sleep and you have this view of how reality is, which is endless compassionate vision. So that's the core of all our training, that everybody goes through the Discovering the Heart of Buddhism. And following on from that is a course called Trusting the Heart of Buddhism. And Trusting the Heart of Buddhism links openness, clarity, sensitivity, mandala principle, and so on, all that you've been learning in Discovering the Heart of Buddhism, links it to this vaster vision of the Buddha's teaching, what the Buddha discovered about the nature of reality. It talks about it in terms of truth, discovering the truth, true nature of reality, and what that implies. So then it touches on samsara, karma, rebirth, but much more from the point of view of how one might understand that from the nature from some sort of deeper understanding of the true nature of reality. If you were to be learning Buddhism from a teacher from a Buddhist country, they would probably go about it in the opposite way round to the way I'm approaching it. Because as a child, you would already be told there is rebirth, there is karma, there is the results of your karma in your future lives. So, be careful what you do, make the right connections, because they are going to affect you in future lives. So you would be taken to the temple, taken to the stupa, taken to meet monks and lamas, and you'd be making those connections, and then you would be making wishing prayers that you would actually, you take refuge, you take bodhisattva vow, you pray to be born in Pure Land, and then you would get a sort of big sense of what Buddhas were, what their qualities were, and what the Pure Lands are like. So you're going to what I'm talking here as the vaster vision. And then you would start practicing in your daily life. And then maybe if you were lucky, you would get some teachings on emptiness, and meditation. that would be considered to be really going into it in depth. So you've actually come the other way. You can say, well, what about the love and compassion? Well, I have to say, we start with that and they start with that. You know, the love and compassion is in a category of its own almost, because they would start with that, we would start with that. But then afterwards, they would come this way and we would come this way, you know, just because of our conditioning, really. Normally, I find that works. So for us, if we started off being told, and a lot of Western Buddhists do start off, especially in the Tibetan tradition, being told, you know, you've got to make lots of punya. Punya, like positive karma, from making offerings on the shrine, doing lots of prostrations, I don't know, build temples, build stupas, do things that are positive and good. Because that'll help you in your future lives. You know, it'll help you when you die. And as a Westerner, you're thinking, well, I don't care what happens when I die. It's this life I'm bothered about. I can't see the point. I mean, I've already made offerings on the shrine. Why make more? You know, like Buddhists don't appreciate it anyway. I mean, they're beyond all this. What difference does it make to them whether I offer them something or not? So that we'd have all sorts of kind of objections to that. So I start the other end and think, well, you know, what we're interested in is like wrong ways of thinking and seeing through that, and then how to apply that in our lives. If that all starts to make sense, then perhaps we would consider a vaster vision, and then we might come to understand, like the THB, the Trusting the Heart of Buddhism, starts to give you some idea how it might be that what I do in this life, this time and place, might actually carry over into a future life. And if things can carry over from one life to the next life, then it's possible that when I die, I could be protected by the Buddhas who've gone beyond that cycle of birth and death. So therefore, I could take refuge. You know, I could take a vow to follow the Buddha through all my lifetimes till I reach enlightenment. Enlightenment's a possibility that I accept. Endless samsara is another possibility that I accept and I want to avoid. So I can make those kind of pranidhanas. And if I can make those kind of pranidhanas, I can set up connections with sacred places, holy beings, and I could be actually actively making very strong connections through body, speech and mind with the body, speech and mind with enlightened beings, so that all makes sense and I can get on and do what your traditional Buddhists would do from the beginning, but perhaps we would be more hesitant to do and do with less enthusiasm. So hopefully we all end up in the same place with that whole range of practices is interesting, as interesting to us as it is to what you might call an ethnic Buddhist who's been brought up in a Buddhist country. So that's my logic. So the vaster vision section that my talk is about today is preparing you to then the fifth area, which somebody will be talking about next time we have a talk, which is pranidhanas, which would include taking refuge, taking bodhisattva vow, reciting pranidhanas, like sometimes we recite. There's some in the prayer book that we recite. And we could really get our hearts and minds behind those pranidhanas and those practices, because we've got that vast vision. We have this real sense of what samsara is. We know what we mean when we say we're taking refuge in the Buddha to go beyond samsara, beyond birth and death, the cycle of birth and death. And then when we take the bodhisattva vow, we know what we mean, that we are going to follow this path that's taking us through all the stages of a bodhisattva, which could last for kalpas of time, in order to realize complete and perfect awakening, at which point we'll be able to benefit all beings effortlessly, endlessly, forever. Sort of space filled with space extends without limit, beings extend without limit. Therefore, may this my pranidhana extend without limit, as long as beings, karma, and kleshas last. That's where the Buddha is. The Buddha is just completely that. And we're making the aspiration to realize that state of being, of truth, if you like, so that we actually also become that. And we can do that if we have the vasta vision. So, and then the last area would be the sixth one, which goes by different names in my mind, but I suppose from the traditional point of view, it would be ritual. And I suppose, as I was saying, an ethnic Buddhist would think about ritual first. I'm a Buddhist, what do? I go to the temple and I make an offering. It's a ritual. You could say it's about connection, it's about mandala principle, it's about the mandala of awakening and connecting with it, energy exchange with it. But if you look at Buddhist countries, the most obvious thing you'll see is this area of ritual. Sacred places, sacred buildings, stupas, images, lots of prostrations and offerings. That's what you'll see. And underneath that is all the other areas. They're all it's all connected as a it's all as what can I say? It's all one piece really. But you'd see the rituals. You'd see people doing a lot of recitation of pranidhanas. Behind that would be all this culturally received vasta vision that they've received since they were, on the children. That tends to be their mindset. You talk to a Tibetan about hells or hungry ghosts. Yeah, they're very real to them. They've always had this sense that there's all these beings in the hells, and children cry and people cry because they think it's all this suffering is so terrible. And when we cry, when we hear about famines and wars, they cry too, and they say, and that's nothing compared with the hells. Sort of there's a lot to feel sad about. So that's something that they would pick up from their culture, really. Whereas I'm having to really stress it as something, as a whole new way of thinking as Westerners. And then you might get retreat centres where people are doing meditation. You might get study centres where people are studying the teachings. And you definitely get temples where people are doing lots of pranidhanas, lots of prayers and chanting. And then, of course, as I said, the basis of it all is love and compassion. So that when people are practicing any of that without love and compassion, they are, they can be pulled up short. What do you think you're doing that for? If you've got no love and compassion, and you go, oh, it's true. Why? I'm studying away, but I got no love and compassion. What's the point of that? That's it's the same with us, isn't it? We come here to hear the Dharma, and then we don't act kindly to each other. What's the point of listening to Dharma if we're not going to be kind to each other? So what's the point I'm trying to make now? I'm trying to tell you why I'm telling you about Vasta Vision. And then also I want to tell you how you would pursue it in this area. What sort of thing would you be doing in a traditional society? You just make sure you were born in a traditional society and brought up as a Buddhist. But since we haven't, how are we going to pick up that same view? And I think reading life stories of the Buddha's life story and the life story of his great disciples, and I think you pick up a lot of the vision from that. And then you can study the THB, which helps you to open up a bit more to that kind of vision. You can study sutras. We're very, very lucky. We've got so many sutras, Pali sutras and Mahayana sutras, all translated and available. It's amazing. We can just kind of absorb all those stories, because a lot of the points of the Vasta vision are there in the stories, and when you hear it in theory, and then you remember one of those stories and you think, oh, is that what that story was about? And the story has stuck in your mind. So listening to stories, and traditionally what people did with sutras was to recite them. They would be told, but they'd also be recited, and people would learn them or learn whole sections of them. It's always good to learn things by heart, because you have them then for reference wherever you are, don't you? But we're getting a bit old for learning things by heart. Khenpo said that he forgets what he learns. This was when he was in his 60s. He said, I forget what I learn now. He used to learn something every day, but he said, when I was a child, what I learned as a child, I know now still. What I learn now, I probably don't remember more than a week or two. So we've left it a bit late, haven't we? But still, stories, we remember stories, don't we? So, and reflecting on them, having read the stories or read the sutra, to just reflect on it and think, what does that imply about the nature of the universe? If that were true, what does that mean about reality? Kind of really open up. Like one of the things that always strikes me is they say in the Mahayana Sutras, it says about how the Buddha is going to teach something in one world system, because there's all these interpenetrating worlds, the whole of space. Well, it's not geographical space, it's limitless space without any dimensions. So it's absolutely crammed full of world systems and worlds and beings. And so in one of these world systems, there's the Buddha's teaching something, and Manjushri is aware he's going to teach it. So he goes to all the other world systems to tell them, to alert them, Shakyamuni is going to teach something, you should go there. So they're all, like billions and billions of world systems away and, listening to their own teachers. And they all go and ask their teacher, can we go and listen to Shakyamuni? Manjushri says Shakyamuni is going to go teaching. He says, well, yes, all right, if you think it's the right time. And then just as long as it takes for them, to move a strong man, I don't know why it has to be a strong man. I think weak people move just as fast. Just to move their arm from one position to the other, they arrive. And that's so reminiscent of what they're finding in physics now, isn't it? About, what do they call it, where two things happen at the same time? As quick as it takes you to move your arm, you're in the other place. What's it called? Something resonancing or something, isn't it? I can't remember, but I think you know what I mean. And you hear that from the physics point of view, and then you think of this the Buddhist world view of beings can just cross the universe just like that. Come and listen to the Shakyamuni, and they listen to his teaching, and then they go back to their own realms, and it's on I mean, you can say cosmic scale, but it's on a scale that just blows your mind away. I mean, some of you might recite sometimes these the Samanta Bhattacharya Panidana. Who does recite it sometimes? Well, quite a lot of you, yeah. And you're aware of how in that it says in one atom, or you could say one point in space, there is as many points in space as there are in the whole of the universe, and all the Buddha realms even, which are of course already limitlessly limitless. So all your ideas of limitlessness, limitedness and limitlessness just have to relax. And then it's almost like the mind has a capacity to glimpse the possibility of that vastness. Well, the fact that we can glimpse the possibility of that vastness suggests it's real, doesn't it? Because if it's all mind, and our mind can actually glimpse that and be inspired by it, it suggests that actually it's probably true. Otherwise, how would that be possible? It's only true because it's only possible because it's true. Which, well, that wasn't just a glimpse of something weird. That was reality, and the fact I can't see it all the time is weird. I mean, we're much weirder than reality, but for us, reality is completely weird because we're so weird. Just as space extends without limit, beings, karma, and kleshas extend without limit. So that, as bodhisattvas, if we're going to take the bodhisattva vow, we have to take on board there's that many beings, And we have got to realize something that would enable us to be able to help them all. So there's something about us that actually does interpenetrate with all other beings, by means of which we could help them. That's such a vast vision, isn't it? But at least if you read the sutras and you read the stories, it starts to kind of dawn on you, oh, you know, this is for real. This isn't just kind of sentimental idea of, you know, let's be limitless, that'll be fun. It's like, you are limitless, so get on with it, you know. We've got no right to hold back, really. There's only one way forward, and that's to realize our true nature. And you can see how, if you have the Vasta vision, when you go back to the first area of love and compassion, how what you understand by love and compassion will have changed, won't it? From when we first start out, we think, oh, I'd like to feel nice and warm and friendly towards even people I don't like, you know. And then as you reach this vaster vision, you realize, oh, it's not just a matter of feeling warm and friendly towards a few people. It's almost like being able to see the true nature of all beings without hesitation. So automatically, this love, complete love and complete equal love for all beings will just be there naturally, because I just see every being as actually what they really are. And as it says in the Jew Lama, I will love all beings as I love myself, because I will have realized I am that awakened wisdom of all the Buddhas, and so are other beings. So seeing other beings would just delight me. And of course I will do everything that's possible to awaken them, because they're like me. How wonderful. That's a different quality to that love, isn't there? And that compassion. And of course it's the same with insight into emptiness. If we're just doing it with a quite a small vision, we're just looking for how to relieve our own suffering by not hanging on and holding on to what's false. But then when we start to realize that what our true nature is, emptiness starts to have a whole different meaning. It's ungraspable, but it's everything. It's totality. So that insight goes straight into this liberated awareness of an enlightened being, like a Buddha or Bodhisattva. And then also the way we practice in our everyday life will change. Because whereas before we might have just been practicing a bit of mindfulness and a bit of ethical training in order to lead a good life and not to get into too much trouble, we're now living a whole life from morning to evening with a sense of enacting this vision of what we truly are, that's beyond birth and death, so that when death comes, we're already practicing beyond birth and death from this very awakened, vast vision. Death doesn't loom very large, actually, because it's like we're going to keep coming back again and again in some way or other in order to continue benefiting beings. Doesn't matter if it's this body or another body. So you develop a lot of equanimity and joy around that. And I have to say, as I'm saying that, when I was sitting by Sangha Akshita's body, I really did feel that sense. And they were saying, his students were also saying the same thing about him. He did have that bodhisattva heart of wanting to benefit others and bring the Dharma into the world. So what difference is it going to make that this body's died? he's going to be doing it somewhere else now. And it's kind of like his legacy of all his students who are following on from him, that's going to continue, and he's going to continue. So it's actually quite joyous to see that it passes beyond life, birth and death, life and death. Okay, his body's died, but he's not gone anywhere, and we're not going anywhere. We're all going to carry on with our bodhisattva activity. It's quite joyful. And there was actually a lot of joy in the atmosphere around when I was at Adhisthana. It's quite noticeable, wasn't it, Tara? Yeah. So that comes from the vasta vision. He certainly had vast vision, although he did tend to... I noticed they did keep saying humanity. And I thought, well, what about the non-humans? May it benefit the whole of humanity. And I felt like, and all the non-humans. So I don't know, does anybody want to ask anything? Yeah.
Lama, you touched on this already, but I wonder if you would say a little bit more about this tendency in Western Buddhism, particularly to really teach outside of this vasta vision, outside of karma, rebirth.
We want to leave it out, yes.
Yes, it's just a little bit more of consequences of that, or
I suppose what I think the consequences of that would be, like if you were, I mean, some people do like go around saying, well, you know, Buddhism needs to get up to date, it needs to drop all its belief system and become like a modern subject, and trying to tell us what's what, which is a bit arrogant, a bit stupid. But on the other hand, what they are teaching is all positive. You know, it's all positive, it's all better than nothing. And I'm sure that people who are drawn into that and then start trying to practice it will start to notice for themselves its shortcomings. And then gradually start to think, well, maybe, you know, maybe there is more to it. So I think it is all going in the right direction. I mean, I don't think you need to take such an attitude that I know better than everyone else and I know it's all just belief and I need to reject it. I think a lot of people don't go that far. They come in thinking, well, these practices are good, I want to engage in them, I want to do them. In fact, I did that myself. And I didn't particularly believe in rebirth. I didn't like any of the conceptual stuff. I didn't even like offerings on the shrine. I didn't even like Buddha images. Can do without any of that. And look at me. I'm one of the worst now. So I think it's a perfectly valid way in, you know. But of course, if you really do hold the view that, I mean, the thing to do is to stay open-minded, you see. You don't have to sort of think, oh, I can't be a Buddhist if I don't believe in rebirth. You could just keep an open mind, couldn't you? You could think, well, I really like the teachings. I really want to follow them as best I can. And I don't know about rebirth, so I'll carry on thinking about it. That's good, isn't it? Sort of benefit from what you can benefit, and then reflect on the things that you find you're not really linking into, and who knows, you might find you do link into it. And even if you don't link into it, you're in a very positive environment that would be conducive to positive thinking. And even the fact that you're thinking about it means you're connecting to that way of thinking, aren't you? Because you've got an open mind and you're thinking about it, reflecting on it. Oh, I don't know. How would I know if I was reborn or not? What do I know about what I am? Do I even know where I came from? Do I know what I'm doing here? Actually, I don't really know anything. That's quite good because it's, you're really dropping your concepts and assumptions as you realize you don't really know anything. So then your mind is much more open to, maybe when you died and you found you weren't dead, you were still around, you'd remember, oh, there was all those teachings about actually you don't die when your body dies. So the fact that you've been thinking about it, even though you didn't believe it, when you actually find you are dead and you are around, you've got some sort of context. Is that the sort of thing you were asking? Yeah, so I don't think we need to feel negative that that's going on. In fact, one could feel quite positive about that going on. But you do have to smile at these self-appointed gurus who start saying Buddhists should now start dropping their beliefs because we know better. I think that's a bit laughable, isn't it? But they will do it. I mean, Westerners will do that because that's the way we are, isn't it? But then the good thing about us is we then review it again, don't we? And then we have there's a whole different movement of thinking, and everybody starts thinking in different ways. So there's, it's quite good to keep lots of people on board with different ideas, so that there's a lot of dialogue and conversation going on. Okay. Oh, did you want to ask something? Go on.
It's about karma, and I was struck when you were saying that the natural tendency is this downward spiral.
Yeah.
And that there's so many more hell realms and suffering and intensity. And
that's what they say, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not even quite sure what my question is. Just, I mean, like, if that's the karma of the beings,
how do you reverse it?
Yeah.
That's why they call it the skillful means of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They're continually working out more and more ingenious schemes for bringing beings out of the lower realms. This is why you get things like money wheels and stupas, and so things that beings can have contact with. If by having contact with these things, then that starts a connection with something that's taking them in the opposite direction. And then Bodhisattvas go down to the hells and they help the beings there and find ways of getting them on an upward spiral, getting them to do things that is going to hook them out. And then you read the stories of the great Bodhisattvas. They go and visit each other and learn different samadhis from each other. And these are all samadhis about how to help beings, all different ways of helping them. Sort of an endless activity in the opposite direction on the part of with the love and compassion of the enlightened beings working in the opposite direction. And the enlightened beings will win because beings are naturally, by nature, Buddhas. So how could it ever succeed that they would always be stuck as not Buddhas, not realizing it? They must realize it again. They must realize it in the end. Each individual must, anyway.
Is there an opposite spiral upwards, or is it?
Well, that's right. Yes, there is. No, there's an upward spiral. So that's why when you make contact, this is why the ritual side is so highly rated, because even if you're not very, you haven't got many good qualities spiritually, you can still make physical contact. You can still do something positive in front of a stupa or an image or something, and it has a power from its own side, because there isn't anything outside of mind. So it's not you think it's outside me and I walk off, but you don't. You never depart from it, because it's part of you. It is you, integral to you and your mandala from then on. So by introducing people to the Dharma, saying mantras so they hear it, or showing them books so they see it, or showing them videos so that any exposure, even if their reaction is negative, it still creates a connection for them that draws them towards it, because the power of the Adhisthana of the Buddhas is drawing them towards. So even if they're fighting and kicking, if they've got a connection, they can't actually escape completely from it. I mean, obviously it's better to have a good connection than a bad one, but, you know, even a bad one's good. Better than none, should I say, yeah. So that's why so much emphasis is put on these things, like prayer flags, an example. Because the wind blows on the prayer flag, it's touched the prayers, it will touch lots of beings, and they will all have some sort of connection with the mandala of awakening through these things. Every time we turn all the mantras, you know, that means this place is getting empowered with the power of those mantras turning in it, and so all the beings that are in this world will get a connection with that energy of the mantras. And it's a whole way of thinking. It's an industry, a massive industry, a punya connection, adhisthana sort of powerhouse. Yes, at the back.
So is it right, Lama, that we've all got Buddha nature, so we're all connected?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking of someone who's not connected in any way.
Right. But you're thinking of them, so they are connected.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't. Did you want to ask something?
Well, you've answered the question.
Oh, right.
So I was a bit concerned about those people who were not connected, but I was sort of answering my own questions, thinking that they've got Buddha nature.
That's right.
Because we're thinking of them anyway.
That's right. That's giving them a connection, and the more you think of them, and the more that connection becomes real, they don't lose their connection with you. So they won't lose the connection with everything good that you're wishing for them. And because they are Buddha, they have Buddha nature, it will have an effect. It's not like it would fall on stony ground because they don't have Buddha nature. They do definitely have Buddha nature. So it will affect them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
That was just a heartfelt response from myself about thinking of my mother as
All right.
Buddha nature.
Yeah. She can't be totally hopeless.
It's close. It's a close call.
Jamie?
So I was struck with when you mentioned culturally received vast division.
Yes.
And as for Westerners, it's you take approach that you're sort of teaching a whole new way of thinking.
Yes.
So I was interested in the kind of role of Dharma art in,
All right.
in that.
That's interesting, yeah.
Within the context of Tashi and everything else around that.
Yeah. Creating an environment of Dharma in some sense or other.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's different ways that art might play a role there, isn't there? Like, for example, in a Buddhist country, the Dharma art would be this kind of thing, sort of definite images of Buddhas and so on. Whereas perhaps what you're thinking of more is, I suppose, more in the Japanese tradition, where they're using, in a way, it's more like heightened awareness, isn't it? It's like art that wakes people up to reality here and now in the moment, sort of in any shape or form. It could be natural things, or it could be your teacups, or your and
the intent behind it,
and the intent behind it, and how that could lead into deeper teachings. But yes, that's definitely again, we would approach that through our own cultural relationship with art, wouldn't we? Sort of, we have a way of relating to art from our own cultural point of view, so we would then have to have it interpreted to us as being something that's going into the vast division, because otherwise it would be art, and we love art because aesthetically it's giving us pleasure and an experience of some kind, but it's not necessarily a vast division. But that could be pointed out, couldn't it? Yeah. And then that could take them into vast division, yeah.
It seems that most art in our society is a sort of relative vision. Well, not a vast division, but
yes.
But it can be. I think the more.
And it's exploratory as well, isn't it? Western art, I get the feeling it's exploring. you know, like there's an aesthetic sense of something that nobody knows quite what it is, that is satisfied by certain configurations of art or music, and that seems to open something up, but it's exploring what would that open into. There isn't any real accepted sense of what it would open into, but then if you add the Dharma dimension, you could sort of say, well, you know, maybe it's moving into that.
Yeah, because aesthetics moves people, so
it does
Dharma
move people.
Then
That's right.
got them, kind of positive movement within
That's
Dharma
right.
connection.
And I suppose in Japan, where it is you know, art is at the service of the Buddhist vision, presumably they more quickly look at art and it takes them to a sort of a more dharmic place than perhaps a Westerner would who had no connection with Dharma. I know that my Japanese friend says when we look at we Japanese, we look at a painting, we wouldn't dream of making a comment about it. And found it very strange that Westerners, when they look at paintings, they comment. And she said, why do they do that? Because from her point of view, I suppose, you know, it's opening you to some truth and reality that's beyond you. So who's interested in your comment? You know, whereas we're looking at it, oh, you know, I'm an artist connoisseur and I approve of that and I think that's good and, you know, blah, 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 all your opinions. That's kind of what we've got to, you know, learn to get out of, really, isn't it? But, yeah, it's an interesting question. How we're going to create a Dharma environment so that people can grow up tending towards the Dharma from a very early age.
When someone's suffering,
Yeah.
like what's happening? Like, how would you describe what that is?
That's a big question, isn't it? I'm assuming. I mean, it is going into the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Truth of what is suffering, and then recognizing that it's actually caused by grasping, and then the vision, when that's really recognized, what's not grasping. I mean, that's the direction in which you'd be pointed to from the Buddhist point of view, but that's very deep and it's not an easy fix. So from the point of view of any particular suffering, each one really has to be approached in its own way, doesn't it? Like, you can't go deep without any prior training. If you to say, that was it. If you just say, like Kemper Rinpoche would tend to say, well, it's all a dream and illusion, ha ha ha. It's actually true, but it might just annoy you, mightn't it?
It's like, because you were talking about how extreme it gets. But that's not real. So what is it?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? It's amazing, really. It's amazing, really, how we could become so confused. This question is the question that Queen Shamala, I think it's Queen Shamala's statement to the Buddha. You know, how is it if the mind is pure from the very beginning, it can become obscured? And the Buddha's answer to that was, well, these are the two great truths that only great bodhisattvas can realize, that the mind is pure from the beginning and that it can become obscured. Because that's so mysterious, isn't it? It's really mysterious. It's ridiculous. How could that be? So I'm waiting to reach the stage of Queen Shamala so that I'll be able to see how I get a clue how it happens from looking at my own experience. But it's still mysterious. You know, like when you have a very clear insight, it's so obvious you think you never forget that. And within moments, you've just got a pale shadow of it. You know, you're trying to prop it up, you're trying to hold on to it. It's already turned into something else. That's so mysterious. How could you forget? It's amazing, isn't it? But when you notice that you do, then you have that feeling of gratitude towards the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, because at least I have somewhere to go in the meantime. You know, I can take refuge and trust that I'm still on the path, and, you know, however long it takes. I don't know if that's at all what you were asking.
Yeah.
Mm. Right. Yes?
I think I've confused myself about this over the years, so if you could
Right.
help me. You mentioned that the Buddha was interested in beliefs which are helpful,
Yeah.
but that's not a definition of truth.
No.
So you could, in theory, have beliefs that were helpful which were not true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, you can.
Because truth would be a correspondence with reality.
Yeah, like for example, if someone was going, if there's a big precipice and somebody's going towards it, and if you were to say to them there's a precipice, they wouldn't believe you. You could say, oh, look, there's a nice donkey over here, don't you want to play with it? It wouldn't be true, but it actually would have had a good effect. So yes. I don't know where that example came from. Is that the sort of thing you're asking? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's why sometimes you could say, well, that somebody's saying something that's not true, isn't that a lie? And we sometimes think, well, we have this word white lie, don't we? You know, it's true enough for this situation. Because actually, if you say literally what is true, then it's going to have a devastating effect, you know. What did she just say about me? I mean, are you going to say? You know, what would be the point? You've got to kind of... It's the effect of it that's important, not. And then the truthfulness of that is the truth in your motivation. And obviously, you're getting into deep water when you're not saying the truth. But sometimes I think that's probably the kindest thing to do.
So, as we travel on our Buddhist journey, we may start off with beliefs which are helpful but untrue.
That's
but
right.
then move on to the ones that are...
That's right. And a lot of this business about the hell realms and the karma, if you get into the traditional texts, they're very detailed about, if you do this action, you get born in this kind of hell, and if you do this action, you get born here. And it looks very definite. And I remember talking to Tibetan Lama about this and saying, you know, the more precise and definite it is, the less I believe it. And then he said, that's interesting, because we Tibetans are the opposite. The more definite and real it's said to be, the more we believe it. So that's why they're told, well, you definitely this happens and definitely that happens, and if you do this will be the definite result. Then they think, oh, this is real. Whereas if you say, like we would probably find more acceptable, well, this will have a positive result. It's not exactly sure what, but it will be positive. We think, oh, well, that makes sense. That's enough. I don't really need to know which hell I'll be born in or which heaven I'll be born in. I mean, I don't know if I believe that. But I can feel in myself that it's a good thing to do, and I can believe that that will have a good karmic effect in the future. So, yeah, I think a lot of the things that Tibetans tend to say are true. I don't think they are true. I think they're just said to kind of make it sound more definite and sure. I look at what effect that has on them, and like if you tell us that we're going to be born in hell, we tend to think hell is forever and I'm terrible and I'm bad and I'll never get to enlightenment. If you tell a Tibetan you'll be born in hell, they'll think, oh right, okay, well I've been to hell lots of times, is this worth it? Let's still do it. I'll do lots of purification afterwards, you know, they tend to think like that. So then they have to have it said, no, you will go to hell. Yeah, but well, not for very long. It won't be for very long. So yeah, some of these things I don't think are as. I think it's. Yeah, I think I've said what I wanted to say. Right. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully.